right, good afternoon, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 69 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting for a briefing by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development and officials or other lead investigators, I'm assuming. And this is on the 2023 reports 1 and 5. We're in hybrid format. Mr. Angus online, he knows the drill. And I think our colleagues here have been before as well. I'm going to use the handy clock system, so I'll give 30-second notice with the yellow card, red card when the time's up. Don't stop mid-sentence, but finish your thought and we'll move on to the next. I'd like to, for this first panel, welcome our witnesses. We have, from the Office of the Auditor General, Jerry DeMarco, Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, welcome, as well as Kimberly Leach, Principal, and Isabel Marsalis, Director. So welcome to all of you. And if you're ready, we'll jump right into it. You have 5 minutes for an opening statement. And when you're ready, I will start the clock, and then we'll get into our rounds of questions after that.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our reports on forests and climate change and on emission reductions through greenhouse gas regulations. Our reports were tabled in the House of Commons on April 20th. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional, unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Joining me today are Kimberly Leach and Isabelle Marsalis, who were responsible for these two audits. The 5 reports I presented to Parliament in April, including the 2 that we are discussing today, show that climate change and biodiversity are intrinsically linked. These 2 crises need to be addressed together through decisive and concerted actions. I will start with our audit report on forests and climate change. The federal government launched the 2 Billion Trees program, which aims to counter climate change, enhance biodiversity, and support human well-being. We found that, given the number of trees planted so far, this program is unlikely to succeed unless significant changes are made. Although Natural Resources Canada nearly met its goal to plant 30 million trees in 2021, it fell well short of its 2022 goal of 60 million trees. Delays in signing agreements with planting partners has significantly challenged the department's ability to plant the number of trees it had planned for 2022, and these delays will spill over to affect subsequent years, which have much more ambitious goals. Since our audit, we understand that some progress has been made in signing additional agreements, but work remains to get the program on track to reach 2 billion trees planted by 2031. Even if that goal is achieved, the program's initial targets for carbon sequestration by 2030 and 2050 will not be met.
We found that the program missed opportunities to enhance biodiversity and habitat-related benefits over the long term. Natural Resources Canada disagreed with our recommendation to provide additional incentives for habitat restoration, as it believes that doing so could reduce available funding to meet the number of trees planted and climate mitigation objectives. However, habitat restoration is part of the solution to the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. We also found that Natural Resources Canada, working with Environment and Climate Change Canada, did not provide a complete and clear picture of how Canada's forests affect greenhouse gas emissions. For example, emission estimates varied significantly in reports over the years because of recalculations prompted by data updates. This changed whether forests were reported as a net source of emissions rather than capturing emissions, making it extremely difficult to make informed decisions. I must stress how important it is that we do not give up on solutions such as the 2 Billion Trees program, and that instead we change course to successfully implement these initiatives. I will now turn to our audit report on emission reductions through greenhouse gas regulations. This audit examined whether the regulations achieved their targets and contributed to Canada's long-term climate change mitigation goals. Environment and Climate Change Canada did not know the extent to which the greenhouse gas regulations we examined contributed to meeting Canada's overall emission reduction target. This was because the department's approach to measuring emissions did not attribute results to specific regulations, recognizing that it is challenging to do so because of interactions among policy measures. When we looked at individual regulations, we found mixed results. The regulations aimed at reducing emissions from power generation achieved their performance targets, but some of the regulations that aimed to reduce emissions from vehicles did not. The department was also very slow to develop new regulations such as those for clean fuels. Regulations are an important element of achieving Canada's overall emission reduction target. However, without comprehensive impact information, the federal government does not know whether it is using the right tools to sufficiently reduce emissions to meet the target. In conclusion, the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss are chronic, insidious, and too often ignored because their gravity becomes apparent over the long term. The government can better use the policy tools it has to address these issues. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have.
Great, thank you for those opening statements. Before we get started, I'd also like to welcome Ron Lapert, Joanne Thompson, and Mr. Mike Morris to our committee today. Our first round is going to be 6-minute questions, and first up we have Ms. Stubbs. So Ms. Stubbs, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of you for being here today. Just a question off the top. You noted in your reporting that the overall trajectory of emissions has been going upwards, except for 1 year. What is it? Could you just clarify the reasoning or the rationale for emissions decline in that one specific year?
So the overall trajectory of emissions in Canada is conveniently pictured on the cover of one of our previous reports, which this is the trajectory from 1990 to 2019. There's been a drop since then that coincides with the economic downturn associated with the COVID pandemic.
Thank you.
It's not possible for us to attribute exactly how much of that drop is pandemic related and how much is related to measures.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Related to the economic downturn through the course of the pandemic. Your conclusions, I think, are quite stunning, and they should alarm every single Canadian, no matter what perspective they come from on this debate about policies and tools to reduce emissions, regardless of the debate on timelines or how to get there, or whatever one's perspective might be. I think it's stunning and shocking and ought to concern every Canadian that you have concluded that the government has no ability and does not measure the outcomes of specific regulations and does not seem to be able to attribute results attached to their words and to their various policy proposals. So I do wonder, do you see this as a systemic problem overall, as an accountability issue, as a lack of will? And what is your response in general to the department's rationale that it is difficult to make those assessments because of the interplay of various different policies?
Yeah, so there are definitely interactions amongst the many measures that Canada has employed to address climate change. However, that's not an excuse for a failure to monitor, or at least estimate the effectiveness of the key policies, whether it's carbon pricing regulations, as is the subject of this report, or subsidies or the other tools that are available. We recognize that there are interactions amongst the measures. It wouldn't be so troubling if Canada's trajectory, as you noted, was going in the right direction from 1990 to now. But given that Canada is the only G7 country that's had an upward trajectory since 1990, we feel that more work needs to be done to isolate the problems, which measures are working, which ones aren't, recognizing, of course, that there are some challenges with respect to tie-ins or interactions between various measures.
Well, I would say, especially given the major consequences for the cost of living on everyday Canadians, on their lives, on literally everything they buy or their transportation choices, it is absolutely incumbent upon a government to be able to measure and attach results and outcomes with its policies and with its words. So are you satisfied with the department's response about those challenges in that in measuring those outcomes? And can you give us any specifics, or do you have any confidence in the department's response so far that actually will be improved and that Canadians will be able to have the information that they deserve about this government's policy framework?
So for this report, the department agreed with our recommendation. So I'm pleased that that is the case. With respect to the challenges of attributing specific reductions to specific measures, we do recognize, as I indicated in my previous answer, that there are some challenges. However, we would like to see them to make more of an effort to do that. And even if there are certain bundles or batches of measures that need to be assessed together, that's okay too. It doesn't necessarily have to be going through all of the 80 to 120 measures that are found in the emissions reduction plan and going through them one by one. But for the key ones, we do believe that they should be able to track them. And I say this because if you'll note at paragraph...
So, sorry, can I just clarify, sir? So do you have confidence that the department will be able to do that? Have they given you any indication that would assure you that some kind of change is happening and that will occur?
I would say that I won't be assured of that until I see the results, and that's a common theme to my responses to questions about predicting the future, is that I do prefer to see actual results rather than good intentions.
Likewise.
Yes.
So we agree wholeheartedly also with your point about the importance of forests and biodiversity acting as carbon sinks. And I also find it quite alarming that it looks like the current plans for tree planting are on track to only be about 3.8% of the overall promise. You noted something in your reports that I've actually heard from growers over the last couple of years, but they've been very reticent to raise it because of their concerns that they would potentially face some sort of retribution or not be able to benefit from the various commitments or agreements that are being undertaken. Would you expand specifically on your concerns around the hardiness and survival level of trees, whether or not that will be improved, and also the status of any provincial agreements or what are the holdups?
Okay, so start with the survival issue. So obviously, one can't assume that 100% of the trees will survive to maturity. There are many reasons for mortality in the forest, and some of those are increasing because of climate change itself in terms of the number of forest fires. So we do recommend that they do a better job at modeling and assessing and monitoring the survival of these trees, and not just assuming that all of them will reach maturity. And you can hear from the department directly in the next hour about their efforts in that regard. I'm getting a red signal here. So.
We're out of time on this one,
okay,
so you may be able to pick that up on a future round.
Okay.
Sure.
Next up, we have Ms. Lapointe, who will have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your report and for taking the time appearing at committee today and helping us deepen our understanding on the recommendations that you've made. This morning, Minister Blair confirmed that this is Canada's worst wildfire season in a century. And so my question is, do you believe that the $2 billion tree program is a valuable program in light of the damage of wildfires that we will continue to see?
Yes. So it is a worthwhile program, and I should add that the concerns over this issue have become more obvious this year with the wildfire season. I would point you to paragraph 1 of our report, where we did mention back in April, climate change will increase risks and negative effects for Canadians because of, for example, the number of heat waves and forest fires. I wish that paragraph hadn't been so prescient for this year's fire season, but it was. We do need to step up efforts to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. the 2 Billion Trees program is worthwhile, and that's pretty much illustrated in Exhibit 1.4. The payback period is long, though, and so I'm actually pleased that the government is willing to take on a program, that this department is willing to take on a program that has such a long payback period, because often governments do discount the future and do not necessarily favor long-term decision-making over short-term, which is lesson number 8 from our climate report from 2021, lessons learned. So there is an important payback in terms of carbon sequestration. It won't start to accrue until after 2030 or so, and that's illustrated in Exhibit 1.4. But once those trees start getting more mature, there is a large degree of carbon sequestration that would result.
Thank you. You mentioned in your report that there were delays in signing agreements with provinces and territories. To your knowledge, what contributed to these delays, and have you noted any progress on this front?
So since the closure of our audit period and the publication of our report, we understand from the department that they have signed quite a few more agreements and agreements in principle, and that the number of trees to be planted that are sort of in the hopper in the signed contracts has increased significantly. It's still a small percentage of the overall 2 billion, and obviously the last 6 years of the program are when they really have to plant the majority of those trees. In the next hour, perhaps you could get an update from the departments as to the exact number of new agreements that have been signed since the close of our audit. But our audit was an attempt to do an early stage assessment with the hope that they could course correct and catch up, and hopefully we will see that. I can't predict whether they will or not, but there has been some improvement since the close of our audit.
I noticed that you made some comments around the emission reductions through greenhouse gas regulations, and you said that your department had recently enhanced carbon pricing across Canada and brought the clean fuels regulations into force. And you're now developing, the regulations focused on reducing emissions from electricity generation, oil and gas production, transportation, and landfills. Can you tell us why these measures are important, and what would be the consequences of not taking these actions now?
So that's another question. So we assess the performance of the regulations brought in by Environment and Climate Change Canada or Natural Resources Canada. We aren't responsible for the decision to make those regulations or the contents of them. Overall, regulations are an important part of the toolkit, along with carbon pricing and other measures such as subsidies, procurement policies, education, and so on. All these combined together form Canada's approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But in terms of the expectations of those new regulations in the 4 areas that you just mentioned, I would suggest that you pose that question to the Assistant Deputy Minister for Environment Canada, who will be here in the next hour.
Okay. So can you tell us, have you seen any progress by the ministry in implementing any of your recommendations that were contained in the report?
Since April. So we have seen an uptick in the number of agreements going over to the 2 billion trees audit for the time being. We have seen an uptick in the number of agreements and agreements in principle signed. So that is a good sign that they're taking the matter seriously. Our main finding was not that they won't make it to 2 billion trees, it's that they wouldn't make it unless they made significant changes. So if they make those significant changes, they can reach the 2 billion tree target. They won't reach their sequestration targets for 2030 and 2050 as initially projected, but they will receive some benefits in the future, but on a slightly longer time horizon than they had originally foreseen.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to Monsieur Simard. Vous avez 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us, Mr. DeMarco. In your report, it seems that you are very clear, at least for 2022. The targets will be missed by quite a lot. So if that is the case, it will have an impact, I imagine, for the future of the tree planting by the government. and you say that it is unlikely that the government will achieve its objectives, or at least that significant changes will have to happen. Are those possible? Is the government in a position to make those changes? Well, yes, those are possible. They have come up with a plan because they've only planted 16 or 17 million of the 60 million planned for 2022. Whether they will reach their objectives is unclear. If they act on the recommendations that we made, it will certainly maximize their chances of doing so. It's early in the program, and that's why we wanted to do our audit now, so that we could provide recommendations to help them make the progress they need to plant those trees by 2030. It is possible. I'm wondering if, in your audit, you looked at the expertise that the government is using. I come from a forestry region. We have an observatory on the boreal forest that is world-renowned, and I have been told repeatedly by people there that this can't be done willy-nilly. Are we talking about forestation, reforestation? What types of soils? What types of trees? We have to take all of those things into account when we look at carbon capture, carbon sequestration. Did the government have that kind of information and expertise when it started on the program? We did not have any findings on those particular aspects. We did observe that they did not focus on biodiversity. For example, our recommendation 47 proposed measures to encourage habitat restoration. And the department has resisted that aspect of our recommendations, even though they are targeting biodiversity and climate change reduction. They need the expertise to enhance biodiversity and the number of trees planted. So I hope that they will revisit that aspect and our recommendation. Do you know people that were hired to plant the 2 billion trees and provide them? Do you know how this process was done? On what basis people were chosen? We were looking specifically at the number of trees planted. I don't know whether we exactly examined that aspect. Perhaps you might want to ask that question of the natural resources representatives that will appearing. Well, was that part of your recommendations? That is, to get people with greater expertise involved? Regarding maximizing the effect on biodiversity and climate change reduction, we called for them to take certain measures, but not specifically expertise. Well, the first time I heard about the 2 billion trees program was during the 2019 election campaign. That was an election program. Was that something that you focused on? When was that announcement? I think it was announced in the throne speech in 2019. And then the department took up the issue, created the program, I think in 2020. So the program was created. To start up the program, how much time elapsed between the announcement and the creation of the program? How many trees? No. Between the time the program was launched and the actual tree planting began. That is item 329. So it was between 20 and 22. In your report, you focused on the survival rate of the. Oh, sorry.
We'll get back to Mario for at least one more short round on this. Thank you. Next, we're going to go online to Mr. Angus, who will have 6 minutes when he's ready. Charlie, I think you're muted.
I know some of my colleagues would love to have that mute button that they could control, but I have the control of it, so it's now off. So thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us today. Your reports are so important. I'm here in Northern Ontario where the rain has finally come, and hopefully that'll push back the devastating wildfires that are all through our region. Neighboring Abitibi is on fire, Sept-Îles is on fire, Halifax on fire. 30,000 people displaced in Alberta. And you write in your report about your efforts that you've raised again and again to get the Liberal government to get serious on emissions reductions. And you write, when I look at all the reports that have been flagged, these grave concerns over the years, it's clear that we have been repeatedly ringing the alarm bells. Now these bells are deafening. Are the alarm bells that you're referring to the climate catastrophe that is upon us now?
So there are several alarm bells. In this report, we speak to the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. The dialogue focused mostly on climate change the last several years, but thankfully now there is more attention to the related loss of biodiversity. And yes, the alarm bells have been rung repeatedly by our office and by others, and it is disappointing to see that emissions today in 2023 in Canada are higher than when Canada announced to the world in 1992 that it was signing on to first stabilize and then reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
And the emissions are higher since Prime Minister Trudeau went to COP26 and told Canada, the world, that Canada would deal with emissions, that we'd put a cap in place, that we had a plan. And yet you write, we cannot continue to go from failure to failure. We need action and results, not just more targets and plans. Parliament must intensify efforts in the fight against climate change to make up for the decades of missed opportunities and missteps. I want you to explain that, because when I talk, it seems to me that my fellow politicians sometimes think climate change is, oh, well, this is a bad year, then things will stabilize. We are on this accelerating curve of crisis getting worse and worse year by year. So what are the pressures to actually start to deliver and move beyond performative promises, that we deal with the fact that Canada is the only G7 country where oil and gas emissions rise year in, year out?
Yes, and so we have our overall report on climate lessons learned from 2021, where we look at the big picture, and then we do these deep dives into specific areas like today's regulations or the 2 Billion Trees program or forest carbon accounting. If I could draw your attention to Exhibit 1 in our forest and climate change report, we state at the end of the paragraph before that exhibit, forests can help reduce greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere, but this should not distract from the urgent need to reduce burning fossil fuels. So the biological capture of carbon through trees, plants, marine life, and so on is helpful, but so long as we continue, as indicated in that Exhibit 1.1, to have a net large flux of fossil carbon from underground into the atmosphere, we will not truly tackle the climate crisis. So we do need to get a handle on human-driven emissions from fossil fuels. It's helpful, and forests are definitely a part of the equation in terms of helping address and mitigate and adapt to climate change. But until we actually bring the trajectory of emissions down from fossil fuel use, we will not succeed in limiting global temperature rise or avoiding catastrophic climate change.
Well, absolutely, and we had the promise of an emissions cap with no plan, and we still have no emissions cap, and emissions are going up. And I notice on the issue that you've raised on the failure to monitor, the failure to track, how is it possible for the government to make promises on reductions if it's not actually tracking and it doesn't have in place the procedures and the data to understand what is happening with emissions in the oil and gas sector?
Yeah, so the emissions are up from 1990 to now, which was the reference year for when the world got together to create the Climate Convention in 1992. There has been a slight decrease in emissions from the 2005 reference level to now, and I'm hopeful that we can see that continue, and that at some point in the next while we would actually see at least us getting back to the starting point of 1990, and then eventually get into reductions. But Canada's in the unenviable position that 30 years after starting this journey towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions and avoiding catastrophic climate change, that we're actually behind the original starting line. We haven't even just made slow progress from the starting line. We've taken step back.
We are the only
G7 country that has a net emissions increase since 1990 to now.
And that's a failure.
Okay, 10 seconds left, Charlie.
Thank you. I noticed that you said that of the 399 progress reports that were supposed to be produced by Environment and Climate Change Canada, they had only produced one. Is that complacency? Is that lack of staff? What is that?
To one of the other reports, which I do happen to have with me on species at risk, yeah, there are a number of problems with respect to Environment and Climate Change Canada's capacity to keep up with the growing number of species at risk in Canada. I'd be pleased to return to this committee and speak about our suite of biodiversity-related reports, which are of equal importance to the ones we're talking about today.
Okay, we're going to have to stop there. We're going to go into a second round, which is going to be 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 2.5, 2.5, 5, 5, and then we'll see where we're at that point. So first, for a 5-minute round, I have Mr. Patzer. So whenever you're ready, Mr. Patzer, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Much appreciated. I'm going to, obviously go to you, Mr. Commissioner. In Section 515, it mentions how the phase out of coal is on track by 2030. But I also know that in another one of your reports, in regards to the just transition, we had it when we were on public accounts, talked about the complete failure of the government to support the communities who are going to be phased out by this. And in fact, that the government lost 2 years, did nothing for 2 years on this. I'm just wondering, did you consider looking at that as well while you were going through this and looking at and seeing that the government's still on track for that, but not making any mention of the communities affected?
So our Just Transition report, and Principal Leach, who's here with me today, was also responsible for that report. We'll consider doing a follow-up on that if we see some tangible progress that can be followed up upon. But even when we reported on that issue and we commented that there still wasn't framework legislation in place to transition workers or sustainable jobs, whatever the new phrase will be for that program, we still don't have that framework. So there's not that much point in revisiting it just yet because not a lot has happened on that file since our report. Part of transitioning the economy towards a more, a green economy and a more sustainable economy means also opening doors for those affected, the communities, the workers, and so on. And that's certainly possible with a green shift towards a more renewable economy, but it needs to be done deliberately rather than in a reactive manner. and our recommendations stand from our Just Transition report that we should not be leaving people behind in the transition and be more proactive in opening doors and not just and looking at softening the blow from closing doors.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty ironic that the only thing that they seem to be on track for is shutting down those plants, which is going to devastate those communities. And to the point that you just made, there's no framework yet for those communities and what they're going to do, and yet the clock is ticking. I just wanted to pick up quickly on what point you made earlier on tree planting. You referenced agreements with provinces for planting. Just wondering, which provinces are those?
So the number of agreements and agreements in principle has grown since the publication, since the close of our audit period. And I believe in the opening statement from the department officials, which you'll hear in a few minutes in the second hour, they'll be able to give you specific numbers and may be able to tell you which provinces have newly signed agreements. We know from media clippings and so on that there's been the announcement from British Columbia with the minister making an announcement there. As for the other provinces, I would direct your question to the departmental officials in the next hour.
Okay, yeah, we'll look forward to doing that. Section 524 says for excuse me, for the coal-fired regulations, the sensitivity analysis was not extensive and did not report estimated greenhouse gas emission reductions. So, can you just elaborate on that a little bit? Like that's, I think that's a pretty damning statement. But can you just elaborate what that means?
Yes, and we're encouraged by the department's response that they are going to up their efforts on sensitivity analysis. This is essentially, looking at the various sources of uncertainty in their model and how those sources of uncertainty affect the model's results, the variation. It's looking at correlations and things like that. So this is part of this attribution question that we got at earlier, which is in order to course correct and actually meet a target, say the 2030 target or the interim goal before then, they need to not only have timely information, which we don't have in Canada. We often have to wait 2 years to see the emissions data for the country in terms of the reports under the NIR, but they also need to better track with all of these measures that are going on, which ones are having more of an effect on bending the curve and which ones aren't.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you one more question because we only got 30 seconds left here. In regards to clean fuel regulations, you mentioned earlier the other crises is the loss of biodiversity. Have you looked yet into the amount of loss of grasslands, of forest lands that are going to be attributed to pursuing growing more biofuels rather than focusing on growing food or even preserving those grasslands for agricultural purposes?
Yeah, so we will be looking at the interplay between agriculture and climate change in future audits. It's an important point you make, though, because it's important to look at the full picture and not have a squeezing of the balloon, which can occur. You attempt to fix one problem and it just creates another problem elsewhere. Certainly, there have been concerns in the especially in the mid-continent of Canada and the U.S., where there has been habitat loss created by subsidies towards ethanol and so on. So it needs to be done in a way that doesn't simply transfer the problem somewhere else, and I think that's what you're getting at.
We're out of time on this round. We're going to go next to Mr. Shahal, who has 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for joining us today and for your work. You talked about in your opening remarks that climate change and biodiversity is linked. Can you speak further to how the 2 billion tree program supports biodiversity?
Absolutely, especially if the department revisited its response to our recommendation on linking tree planting with habitat restoration. So you all know the old adage of not being able to see the forest for the trees. This is a perfect example of that. If we focus just on tree planting without looking at restoring the habitat or the ecosystem in question, we wouldn't be maximizing the benefits. If the tree planting is done in a deliberate way where the co-benefits for biodiversity and for human well-being, whether it's recreation, shade, mitigating urban heat islands, and so on, if that's done in a deliberate way, instead of just looking at, oh, let's just meet our numbers of trees, the worst case scenario would be, well, not the worst case scenario, but an unfortunate scenario would be if there's just a proliferation of monoculture tree plantations that aren't really forests, right? There are some natural monocultures in Canada, but so it's not a case where you should never plant the same tree in a site, but same tree species. But generally speaking, there will be more biodiversity benefits accruing with a more diverse planting approach. So we have a recommendation about that in terms of dovetailing the tree planting goals with habitat restoration. That's become all the more important because of the Montreal biodiversity framework from the latest conference of the parties, where I believe it's target 2, I think it's target 2, where there's a new target about restoring 30% of degraded lands. Here's a great opportunity through reforestation, rather than just tree planting, to restore forests rather than just creating tree plantations.
Thank you. You talked about that 2021 we hit or close to our targets, or we hit our targets. And you also mentioned in your opening remarks there's challenges dealing with our partners. Can I say those are supply chain issues in obtaining enough trees to be planted? Can you talk a little bit more about those challenges specifically with our partners?
Well, there's numerous challenges. So rightly so, private industry working in the nursery area, if they're going to supplement their current approach, because there's a lot of reforestation that goes on just in the normal course of forestry. So this is supposed to be 2 billion incremental trees, not just double counting the ones that would be done for forest management generally. They don't want to make those investments unless they know, investments in seedlings, unless they know that there's going to be a demand for them. Canada, the federal government can't create that demand on its own because most crown land in Canada is provincially controlled. So that's a key partner, right? Is those agreements with the provinces. If the provinces agree with Canada as a federal government to enter into long-term agreements, then you'll have that certainty for industry to invest in the massive amount of seedlings that would be needed on top of the current stock that's used for typical forestry management.
You said there were many issues. What were some of the other issues?
I think I'll turn to Principal Leach to discuss some of the other issues, because there are a lot of actors at play here in terms of provinces, territories, communities, Indigenous communities, and so on. So Ms. Leach can elaborate on that question.
Yes, thanks very much for the question. And yeah, the issue really, and the difference between achieving the 2021 target and not achieving the 2022 target was the lack of agreements with the provinces. So provinces are the group that's going to plant the most trees. So about almost 70% of the trees that are to be planted through this program will be by provinces and territories. So in 2022, they decided that they wanted an agreement in principle with of the provinces in order to before they started to have project proposals accepted. So that was really, the significant challenge that happened in 2022.
Do you think that the 2 billion tree program is a valuable program, and should we continue with it?
Absolutely, it's a valuable program, especially if it's done in a way that maximizes co-benefits with biodiversity and human well-being. Even on carbon sequestration, even if the initial targets for 2030 and 2050 won't be met, there will be significant sequestration as illustrated in Exhibit 1.4 of our report. It just takes a little longer just because of the pace of growth and the fact that most of these trees are being planted in the last part of the program rather than the first part. But it's certainly worthwhile doing if it's done in a deliberate and informed way that truly does try to maximize those benefits I spoke about and provide additional benefits to species at risk and biodiversity generally.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're next going to go to Mr. Simard, who will have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I read your report, Mr. DeMarco, and I have the impression that the government has put in place some principles and rules, but without any feedback to know whether they are actually having impact. So is this your finding? I believe it is on greenhouse gas reduction, that they aren't clear on which or regulations or how much impact they've had. And we've got the same issue with the 2 billion trees. You talk about regulations and greenhouse gas regulations. Mr. Guilbeault, among others, has said that we have to put an end to ineffective subsidies for oil and gas. I don't want to speak for you, but perhaps this government is a little better at providing principles than at overseeing the results. They need to concentrate much more on the results. And this is the theme of a lot of our reports. They have to be realistic as well with their programs. You talked about the emission reduction funding. There's also our report on hydrogen. So it's the same department that's involved in all those reports. So we've had this series of reports, and I would like to see the results of the lessons applied and the focus not just on plans and targets. I hear you saying realistic. Perhaps the government isn't always realistic in its proposals. And in your opinion, would not one of the most effective things be to end subsidies for fossil fuels? We have already appeared on this issue. Perhaps it was last year before this committee. So we have produced 2 results on these subsidies. Canada has long said that it would be acting on this, but there are still debates on what inefficient means. I agree that this is something that action is needed on. Thank you.
I'm there. Next up, we have Mr. Angus, who will have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to go back to your comments about how you have been repeatedly ringing the alarm bells, and now these bells are almost deafening. All across the eastern United States, central Canada, the smoke from Canadian forest fires burning has left planes have been canceled, people forced to stay indoors, people sent to the hospitals. We're dealing with a different kind of beast in these fires. The intensity, the fact that they're burning right down to the soil, this is not rejuvenating for us. These are extremely devastating impacts on biodiversity, on animal life. And yet we see, the 2 billion tree program just to me seemed like such a perfect Instagram quote that we would do this. When I read your report and see that not only are we seriously missing the target, but in terms of reductions that's being planned is 0.1 megatons of CO2. Is that in any way sufficient to address the emissions that are coming out that are heating our planet, that are destroying our forest and threatening communities?
So you're referring to paragraph 22 of our report, where we comment that their initial estimates of the carbon sequestration benefits resulting from this program were not realistic, and that they would only generate 0.1 megaton by 2030 and 4.3 by 2050. So these are relatively insignificant amounts. There are greater sequestration benefits further out beyond 2050 as the trees grow larger. But it does mean that we should not distract ourselves with programs like this from the urgent need to address fossil fuel emissions. That's the key thing that Canada needs to deal with.
Yeah. I love planting trees. We got tree planters up here all the time. That's great, but that this is not a substitute for putting a cap and dealing with the emissions coming out, I think is a really important element. The one other thing I wanted to ask you is on the kind of trees, because we know that deciduous trees like aspen can provide dramatic breaks in fire. But we know that industrial forestry basically are planting burners, and you talked about monocropping. Has the government looked at the kind of trees that would not only be carbon able to sequester carbon, but also be resistors to wildfires burning through coniferous forests?
For the most part, Canada's forests, if you're walking through them, there's a diversity of species. It's not like a tropical rainforest with that level of diversity, but there is a diversity. There are some areas, as lodgepole pine and certain stands of aspen and so on, for example, where it is close to being a monoculture, at least at the site scale. There have been recent studies about that, and I don't profess to be an expert in the area, but the University of Alberta has recently been studying the fact, or their findings were that I believe it was Professor Chang at the University of Alberta who published the journal in the journal Nature this year, that a more diverse planting not only has the biodiversity benefits that we talked about in our report, but also has the benefits you're talking about in terms of being more climate resilient in terms of resisting or at least diminishing the intensity or extent of fires. So you may wish to hear from experts in that area, forest ecology and forest fires, to hear more about that. But I'm intrigued by those new studies.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to go to Mr. Dreeshen, who will have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here today. I just wanted to start with a couple of different things, and I'm glad that you mentioned that the 2 billion trees, it's never really been discussed that it's in addition to what is already done, because many people don't understand that it takes about 2.5 years for the provinces to put in 2 billion trees, because they're at about 800 million per year at this particular point in time. So yes, it's a target, but it's also something I think we should realize that these partners are already kind of stretched, but that nevertheless they have the capability, and if we can get the seeds to them, they'll be able to move forward with it. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think that's important for folks to understand. The other thought too, and one of the aspects of the massive forest area losses right now is that we have two choices. We can either go in there and we can emphasize planting there, or we can let nature do its own thing in order to make sure that now that we have the forest floor burnt off and all of this extra fuel gone, that it'll do what it's supposed to do, which is what has happened for tens of thousands of years. So hopefully we can sort that part out. The other thing that I would like to talk about, you did say that since 1992, we haven't done very much on this, and 23 of those years have been under a Liberal government, but we see that there's issues, and one of the things that you also talk about has to do with carbon pricing. And in the 2022 report, when you compare a bunch of countries on U.S. dollars per ton for carbon, Canada is, for all of the Western Hemisphere and counting China, our amounts of cost to us are 5 to 11 times that of these individuals. So if we take a look at Argentina, it's $5 per ton compared to our 40 at that time. Mexico, 3.7. Colombia, Chile, 5 in each case. China, between 8 and 9. I have a little trouble kind of figuring out what that is. We have this massive tax for us here in Canada. How do our results compare to these other countries that I just mentioned when we're looking at 5 to 11 times more that we pay, and that's just when we look at US $40 per ton as a number.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. I guess I'll start with your second point first, which is natural forest fires. Yes, especially in the boreal forest of Canada or in tall grass prairies and so on, fire was has been an important part of the ecosystem for thousands of years. But it's the intensity and the extent and so on, and the frequency of fires that is of concern now. Jack pines evolved with fires as being part of their life history in terms of the the evolution of their cone structure, and so on. So we're not saying that all forest fires are bad, but when you're getting this extent over the long-term norm, then that is a big concern.
If I could just jump in there, how much of that is related to changes in forest management that have taken place in the last 10 to 15 years? Was that ever analyzed?
So we haven't done that analysis. There's a whole new area of attribution science in terms of trying to pinpoint the increases in severity of any type of event like forest fires or severe weather or hurricanes with climate change versus other things like forestry practices. So we haven't done that, but there is an area of scientific inquiry, and there are experts that you could draw on for more information on that. And then to your second point about carbon pricing, it's very complicated to compare across countries because just like Canada, there are so many different measures in place in each country. You could have a high carbon price and not very strong regulations and get to where you want. You could have a lot of regulations and no carbon price and get where you want. You could have subsidies. There's a whole bunch of different factors involved. So simply comparing, us to a country that doesn't have carbon pricing or comparing one that has a higher carbon price like Sweden, you have to look at the whole suite and see how we're doing.
Yeah.
Our whole suite from 1990 to now has not been a good package. We have not got the reductions.
Well, and that was the point, and I know I have just a few seconds left. That was the point that I'm making, is what kind of a deal are Canadians getting by paying $40 compared to what is happening in all of the competing nations that we have, such as China and all of the Western Hemisphere.
And that's exactly why we want them to track the measures or bundles of measures and how they're doing, as opposed to just getting to 2030 and say, again, we didn't make it, something was wrong, we're not sure what. We would like to see course correction and more timely measurement and monitoring of the measures.
Thank you.
Okay, we're out of time on that one, and we're going to go now to Mr. Sabera for the last 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Commissioner and team. And thank you for your service and what you do for not only MPs but for all Canadians. On the report on the emissions reduction through greenhouse gas regulations, the first thing I'd like to highlight is thank you for acknowledging the more than 100 policy measures that our government has put in place to combat climate change. It's obviously layered, many regulations, but it is the right direction in terms of combating climate change and overall reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I think you put that in the context of Section 5.13, if I'm not mistaken. From that, I have two questions in my time permitted. First, with regarding to Section 5.57, with regards to our electrical grid and the ongoing phase-out of coal-fired electricity. I believe the target is 2035, where we'll have an electrical grid that is clean in the context of non-emitting GHGs. On 5.57, can you elaborate any further in terms of Environment and Climate Change Canada established performance targets, indicators, and expected outcomes for electricity segregations? Regulations we examined and the regulations had achieved their targets to date.
So this part of our report focuses on the coal-fired generation of electricity regulations and reaching their target. And this is not as complicated as some of the other issues that we've just talked about. I mean, it was still a big endeavor to deal with this, but that we found that Canada did appear to be on track, working with the provinces. Obviously, the federal government doesn't have direct control over electricity generation in Canada, but it can regulate it through the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. So that, yes, we did find that with respect to the coal-fired generation of electricity regulations, that they were on target for what they were expecting, and they appear to be on target for 2030 as well.
And thank you. My second topic relates to methane. And methane has been getting a lot of press, rightly so, for many reasons in the last several months and over the last few years. But one of the things we saw is actually even during the COVID downturn and the freezing of economies, that methane worldwide emissions actually increased in the United States, so forth. And that, as you say in Section 5.61, methane is a potent greenhouse gas with at least 25 times the warming potential of carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. Now, I've read this section, and I reread it, and I read some of the stuff online with regards to methane, and we put in place, a number of countries put in place measures to reduce methane emission. That is going to be one large aspect of meeting GHG's emissions targets for any country. Is it a matter, in your view, Commissioner, that the data being collected needs to strengthen, or that the measures in place need to strengthen, or both? Because this is an economic win to reduce methane emissions and an environmental win to reduce methane emissions as we move forward.
Yeah, getting a handle on methane emissions and then limiting them through measures such as regulation provides immediate benefits, partly because of the relatively shorter time frame that that methane spends in the atmosphere compared to CO2, and because of their high warming potential, as you just talked about. So if we could get a better handle on methane emissions and then deal with them more effectively through regulations and other measures, that would go a long way, and it would provide immediate benefits, as immediate as you can get on an issue like climate change, which is long term, because pulling methane or dropping emissions on methane saves a lot over the long period of time because of the difference between it and CO2 in terms of its residency time in the atmosphere.
Okay, in terms of measuring the methane in 5.76, you speak to as a policy, a bottom-up approach versus a top-down approach. It seems one captures more than the other. Is there anything you can elaborate on that? And if there's anything else we would need to forward to myself or to the members to understanding how we better measure the methane's emissions.
Yeah, and you'll have the department officials here in a few minutes as well to talk about their agreement and new funding with respect to getting a better handle on some of the emissions that have been historically not measured very well in Canada. So it's actually a theme between the two reports today. Land use change, and forestry emissions are not well understood in Canada, and methane emissions are not well understood in Canada. We need to get a better handle on both of those things so that we know what interventions need to be made to bring down those emissions from those two sectors.
Thank you,
We're
Chair.
out of time. Colleagues, that would normally take us to the end of the first round with the Commissioner and his officials. I have had a request from Mr. Morris if we would give him 2.5 minutes through unanimous consent for a round of questions. Okay, seeing none, then Mr. Morris, go to you for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. I appreciate that. Our country is literally burning, and so the need for urgent action on the climate crisis is now only more clear for so many more Canadians across the country. My question is about lobbying from the oil and gas industry that slows down the pace of progress. Specifically, Commissioner DeMarco, in Report 5, you note that not only did Environment and Climate Change Canada not know whether greenhouse gas regulations you looked at contributed to emission reductions, but that the clean fuel regulations were 3 years behind schedule, in your words, jeopardizing the pace of Canada's emissions reductions, obviously. We have a new round of regulations that have been promised to be forthcoming on methane, clean electricity, and oil and gas caps. So I think it's pretty pertinent to understand whether we can move quickly and with the kind of stringent regulations that we need. Last week, we learned that a Suncor executive helped write a climate plan of this government. And so my question to you, Mr. DeMarco, is whether you've seen any evidence of involvement from the oil and gas industry that led to the 3-year delay in the clean fuel regulations.
So thank you for the question. The reasons for the delay that the department told us related to COVID and capacity and so on. Obviously, the oil and gas industry was an important stakeholder in some of these regulations, so they were part of the consultation process. I would suggest that you, if you're given the permission by the committee, to ask some of that question to the department in terms of specifically whether they were a cause of delay, as opposed to simply participating in the public process leading up to the regulations being promulgated. But to your point, 5 years for a cornerstone piece of regulation that, by the way, was only dealing with one of the 3 phases of fuels rather than all 3. So they scaled down the scope of the regulation and then took more years to actually finish it. I agree with you that if the government is going to, and the United Nations and the world is going to call this a global climate crisis, then we need to act like it, and that means acting with dispatch. Every time that we work on reducing emissions more quickly, essentially there's a compound return for that because of the long time that greenhouse gas emissions stay in the atmosphere. So the faster we act, the better we'll have and the more return on investment we'll get, because we will stop more accumulation of these long-lasting gases in the atmosphere.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to the end of that. So, colleagues, we're going to suspend briefly just so we can switch out the panels. So I'd like to thank Mr. DeMarco, Ms. Marsolet, and Ms. Leach for being here today. And with that, colleagues, we're suspended. We'll be back in just a minute. In session, I'd like to thank our officials for our second panel here from the Department of the Environment. We have some regular faces, so welcome back. We have Mark Diorio, Assistant Deputy Minister, Science and Technology Branch, John Moffat, Assistant Deputy Minister, Environmental Protection Branch, Jacqueline Gonsalves, Director General, Science and Risk Assessment, Science and Technology Branch, Derek Hermanitz, Director General, Strategic Policy Branch, Nicholas Winfield, Director General, Canadian Wildlife Service, and I believe joining us as well, Lindsay Pratt, Director, Pollutant Inventories and Reporting. Then from Department of Natural Resources, Anne-Helene Mathy, Executive Director, Economic Analysis Division, Canadian Forest Service, and Glenn Hargrove, Assistant Deputy Minister, Canadian Forest Service. So thank you all for being here with us today. I believe that Mr. Moffat and Mr. Hargrove will each have a 5-minute opening statement. So we'll go with Mr. Moffat first, and when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. My colleagues and I are happy to be here to meet with you today to discuss the Commissioner's audit recommendations. I'd like to start by acknowledging that the Commissioner on Environment and Sustainable Development plays an important accountability role for the government. Environment and Climate Change Canada appreciates the Commissioner's 3 recommendations, and we have agreed with the 3 recommendations and have developed action plans to address them. Although Canada has recently made significant progress in implementing greenhouse gas regulations, as well as the other measures in the 2022 Emissions Reduction Plan, the 2016 Pan-Canadian Framework, and the 2021 Strength and Climate Plan. As you discussed in the previous hour, achieving our 2030 target of 40 to 45% reductions from 2005 levels and reaching net zero by 2050 will require significant effort to accelerate emission reductions. These goals are being supported by an all-of-government approach. That approach includes a wide range of programs and measures, as the Commissioner described, ranging from using federal procurement to transform markets, to providing direct financial support to decarbonization projects, to the numerous investment tax credits announced in Budget 2023. For our part, Environment and Climate Change Canada is strengthening existing regulations and developing new regulations to drive additional reductions across the economy. We recently enhanced carbon pricing across Canada, for example, and brought the clean fuel regulations into force. We're now developing regulations focused on reducing emissions from electricity generation to move towards the goal of a net zero electricity grid by 2035, to reduce emissions, to reduce methane and other greenhouse gas emissions from oil and gas production, from transportation, and from landfills. As we implement our current regulations, and as we develop new ones, we will respond to the 3 recommendations from the Commissioner. In particular, we're committed to continued improvements in our ability to model the impacts of new measures and to monitor and report on the impacts of existing measures. We've committed to improve the use of sensitivity analysis in our modeling, the Commissioner's first recommendation. Robust sensitivity analysis supports informed decisions by identifying key aspects of an issue that can have a significant influence on outcomes. Sensitivity analysis can also help avoid an unwarranted over-reliance on modeling in issues with highly uncertain outcomes. It can also improve public communications. We've also committed to continuing to engage with the 3 Western provinces, BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, on the ongoing implementation of those provinces' methane regulations. Ensuring that their actions deliver expected results is a key feature of any equivalency agreement that we enter into, and this information will also be important when the existing regulations expire and renewal of the equivalency agreement is discussed. We've also committed to address the Commissioner's 3rd recommendation to use the most recent measurement-based data to improve the accuracy of the oil and gas sector methane emissions we publish in the National Emissions Report. We made this commitment in our most recent NIR. While my remarks have focused on the 3 specific recommendations made by the Commissioner in its audit, I'd be happy to answer, well, my colleagues and I would be happy to respond to any questions that you might have about these issues or about our overall regulatory agenda. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Moffat. And now we'll go to Mr. Hargrove. Had two different spellings of your name, so we'll go with one that's here. So Hargrove, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the committee for the invitation to be here at this meeting, which is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'd also like to thank the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development for this audit on forest and climate change. I'll start by saying we accept all but one of the report's recommendations, on which we will continue to work closely with our colleagues at Environment and Climate Change Canada. The Commissioner did speak to that one recommendation, and I'd be happy to speak to that through the question period if that would be of interest. Earlier this spring, Minister Wilkinson was in North Vancouver announcing an investment that will translate into more than 37 million new trees in BC. These trees will revitalize fire-ravaged areas. And the province of BC estimated that this project alone will eliminate 2.1 million tons of carbon dioxide between now and 2050, similar to taking close to 500,000 vehicles off our roads. Clearly, this is good news for our environment, but it's also good news for the economy. We expect it will generate about 800 good sustainable jobs across BC, in labs and nurseries, and in new employment opportunities for surveyors, planners, and others. As the Minister has said, planting 2 billion trees is a marathon, not a sprint. We've engaged nurseries across the country to identify ways the program could ramp up the seedling supply chain to align with our goals and keep our principles top of mind, to have the right partners to plant the right trees in the right place for the right reasons. As the owners of Crown lands and the managers of public land, the provinces and territories' participation in this program is critical. 7 of them have signed agreements in principle outlining the importance of biodiversity, habitat restoration, carbon sequestration, permanence of forest cover, and monitoring. Of those, 6 have also inked agreements outlining their specific tree planting contributions, which will only accelerate our pace. And there's more to come. We have signed or are negotiating agreements that will bring us 260 million trees. I can confidently say that we will surpass our goals for planting on federal land and in urban areas. Projects on private land and those directed by Indigenous peoples have also made significant strides. In fact, 1 in 5 projects were Indigenous-led in our first year of planting. On forest carbon, we'll continue to partner with Environment and Climate Change Canada to produce world-class GHG estimates using methodology supported by more than 100 peer-reviewed research papers. We continue our efforts to stay current with the latest advancements in this field. For instance, the 2023 budget this year, as part of its investment in forests and forest workers, included funding to improve our forest data and reporting. And our regular discussions with forestry experts and stakeholders mean we're aware of the best available science data and best practices, as well as where we can improve. Our modeling tools will continue to evolve thanks to scrutiny by experts and peer review processes. We're proud that our reporting methods align with internationally accepted practices, as the Commissioner noted. And this means we produce a big picture report that collectively reflects human impacts such as harvesting, regeneration, fire suppression, and conservation. This method of reporting meets the reporting guidelines of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and reflects guidance from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. To conclude, there is no solution to climate change without forests. Nature-based climate solutions are an integral part of the solution. The good news is that interest remains high in the 2 Billion Trees program, and project applications continue to arrive, and we continue to work with stakeholders and partners. Recently, we also completed important work collaborating with Indigenous governments and organizations across Canada to co-develop the framework of an Indigenous funding stream expected to launch this summer. By recognizing Indigenous climate change leadership, we ensure the end result reflects diverse Indigenous priorities and cultures. Mr. Chair, there's an old proverb that goes something like this: "Blessed are those who plant trees under whose shade they will never sit." I realize that many people wish to see immediate results, but I'll say again, this process is a marathon and not a sprint. Every tree planted along the way to 2 billion trees provides benefits for Canadians for decades. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. We're going to go through one round of 6 minutes each, and first up I have Mr. Dreeshen. So, Mr. Dreeshen, over to you. And I wanted to also welcome Mr. Tony Baldinelli to our committee today. So, Earl, over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will share some time with Mr. Baldinelli. Mr. Hargrove, just wanted to talk to you a little bit. Has the limiting of hours for firefighters come that they can be on the job affected their efforts to fight fires? You are, of course, associated with the Canadian Forest Service, and this is what we hear, is that firefighters are being pulled off because of regulations that have been put forward. Is that true?
I would expect that the regulations that you're talking about are provincial jurisdiction.
All right, we'll get to that. You had indicated that Mr. Wilkinson had an announcement that indicated that BC was going to push for 37 million more trees. That would be, of course, on top of the 218 million that BC already produces. So it's not a big deal. And that was sort of, I know you were here listening to what was mentioned in the last round. So I would submit that perhaps an alternate press release that NRCan could have done back when it suggested 2 billion trees was to work closely with the provinces to assist them in increasing and to a stage of doubling the work that they already do. And then they would have been the ones responsible for putting this particular natural resource on their land. So I understand it sounds pretty good when we want to talk about 2 billion trees, but it's already being done. And the fact, if you can help as far as making sure that we have the nurseries there to have the seedlings, that would be great. But I submit that spending a lot of time talking about how great the program is going to be, let's just get the people out there dealing with it, and the provinces have that ability as well. But I wonder if you could comment on the capabilities that the provinces have to be able to deal with this and how we could work together rather than constantly saying, well, we've got this 2 billion tree plan.
Thank you. So we do recognize that provinces and territories are a critical partner in the program and have been working with them throughout. And we do have a number of agreements. We have 7 agreements in principle with provinces. We have 6 contribution agreements with provinces.
Is that to add then to your 2 billion? It's not. I mean, they still do it anyway, but that's to add to the
2 billion trees is actually about a 40% increase in the amount of trees planted in Canada. So the idea with the program is that these are incremental to trees that would normally be planted for regulatory requirements and those sorts of things. And so we're working closely with the provinces to ensure alignment on the goals of the program around climate, habitat restoration, those sorts of things. And to ensure that the trees are incremental to trees that are already being planted, and to in recognition of the provinces and territories' role around sure. the ownership and management of crown lands.
And of course, as we heard earlier, the U of A, putting in a more diverse plan for climate resilience, I think that's helpful. I'll give my time to Mr. Baldinelli.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Chair, for allowing me to sit in. Just a quick question I wanted to pick up. The Environmental Commissioner had indicated through the departments and their difficulties in measuring and meeting, the targets and promises that the government has set. And yet we continue to raise targets, and we can't meet our current targets. And you had mentioned about the net zero electrical grid by 2035. But how do we reconcile that with the fact that several provinces have said they're unable to meet 2035? In the province of Ontario alone, the Independent Electricity System Operator in December put out a report saying to get to a net zero grid 2050, that'll be $400 billion in the province of Ontario alone. You're going to need 6 times the 14,000 workers that exist there. So how does the government work with the provinces to establish that? Look, for example, in 2025, if Pickering is taken offline, that's 15% of the grid. Nuclear in Ontario is about 60% of the total province. If you take 15% of the grid, how does Ontario replace it? Probably through natural gas. So there has to be a way to work together, because there's no way right now that under these goals that I see a net zero electrical grid by 2035.
Sorry, do you have a question?
Well, how is it that the government can work with the provinces to achieve it?
Yeah.
Well,
from the, right? I mean,
that can't identify results or impact.
well, yeah, like, I mean, how is it that you're going to be working with the provinces to do that?
The federal government, from the outset of addressing the climate and biodiversity crisis, has acknowledged that these are both areas of shared jurisdiction that require efforts by all Canadians and all levels of government. The federal government has some jurisdiction over some of these issues. So, for example, we will be developing a clean electricity regulation. We've provided investment tax credits to enable provincial utilities and private sector electricity generators to take advantage of those, reduce the capital costs of investing in clean electricity. It will be up to provinces to make those decisions about how to allocate those costs. The reality is, however, that as the economy decarbonizes, all jurisdictions, including Ontario, are going to have to invest a lot of money in increasing electricity generation, regardless of whether that generation is clean or not.
And we're out of time on this one, so we're going to jump now over to Mr. Blois, who has 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are for ECCC, and I have report number 5 in my hand from the Commissioner, and I'm referencing paragraph 5.23, where the Commissioner talks about the fact that the Department did not model purchasers' behaviors, and it goes on to say that did not model the impact of price changes. What information or what can you just briefly describe to this committee how on purchasers' behavior, whether or not on regulations around emission intensity for vehicles or perhaps the retail fuel charge, what modeling goes in terms of behavioral change? Because it's all about changing behavior, either for companies or perhaps, I guess, consumers. What can you briefly describe what that would look like for us?
I'll start and then I'll turn to my colleague, Mr. Hermanitz, who's responsible for modeling. Just to be clear, this is not about carbon pricing.
No, but I'm going to build my question on it. I guess on purchasing model, then explain to what this does relate in the Commissioner's report, and then I'll segue to carbon pricing.
Commissioner's report relates to regulations which do not regulate consumer behavior. They regulate the kind of vehicle fleet that each vehicle manufacturer can sell in Canada.
So, Mr. Moffat, what I'm hearing from you is that you don't feel that the purchaser's behavior is relevant to this element at all. You don't really necessarily agree with the Commissioner's report in that sense, then, do you?
I didn't say that.
Okay. What are you saying then? Because they're saying it's important, and you're saying this is about what the type of stringency on the auto manufacturers. The Commissioner's obviously talking about inadequacy of the department in terms of behavioral impacts on consumers. And you're saying there's no context. So why is that not important?
No, I was trying to describe what these regulations do. These regulations establish limits on the fleet-wide emissions that each manufacturer can provide in Canada and require those to be reduced. Coming back to one of the themes that you've heard both from the Commissioner and from us, the approach to decarbonizing the economy has to include a suite of measures in order to influence producer decisions and consumer decisions. We have these regulations regulate what gets produced. What gets purchased is influenced by the carbon price.
Right, but wouldn't the regulations also have a downstream impact on the cost of vehicles as well? And is that what the Commissioner's trying to get at in this report in terms of that modeling behavior?
No, I think what the Commissioner is getting at is that when we do a regulatory impact analysis statement, we attempt to identify the impact of a regulation, not just on its intended objective here, reducing emissions, but also costs and benefits. And that impact in turn.
So Mr. Moffat,
would you like me to answer your question?
Well, I'm trying. I only have so much time. And so I want to get to the point. We'll talk about carbon pricing then. So, maybe you're Mr. Hermanutz. Is that how I say your name?
Sure. Yeah.
You're the one that's involved in the modeling on behavior. I'm curious on the retail fuel charge. What type of behavioral data goes into that? What assumptions are built into ECCC's model for the retail fuel price on carbon?
In the context of this analysis that you're referring to? Yeah.
The commissioner is raising concerns about the department's element to consider purchasers' behavior, which of course is consumers.
Right.
So I'm wondering about I'm going a little bit broader and trying to understand the department's element of how you model behaviors for consumers through whether it's regulations or other types of mechanisms of the 100 that are mentioned in this. What do you take into consideration for household behaviors as it relates to the policies that you're adopting?
Right. So I'll start with, there's different types of analysis that we do and different types of models that we use for that different type of analysis.
So for rural residents, I'm a rural member of Parliament. What type of assumptions do you build in terms of changed behavior as it relates to the policies that you're developing?
So for the different types of analysis, when we do a regulation, when we publish draft regulations and then the final regulations in a regulatory impact analysis statement, we do a cost-benefit analysis, which is a specific type of economic analysis following the cabinet directive. Often that analysis will be what we could call a static analysis. So it wouldn't necessarily take into account the second-order effects I think you're referring to.
Okay.
But within a RIAS, we also can do, with a different type of modeling, distributional analysis. And when we use those models to look at the overall carbon, like climate plan.
Can I just ask this? Do you see a lived difference between urban and rural Canada vis-a-vis the impact of some of these policies? Is that built into your model, yes or no?
I don't think it's built into our model.
Thank you. On clean fuel standards, I'm a member of Parliament from Atlantic Canada. We've been hearing concerns from the 4 Atlantic premiers. Do you have a sense, does the department have a sense of the cost? Obviously, the commissioner criticized the delay. I expect that the department had rationale for why it was trying to work, but do you have a sense of what the cost is going to be? We've heard the PBO is 17 cents a litre. Do you know what that will be specific to Atlantic Canada?
I don't have that number in my head, but it's in the cost-benefit analysis. I can provide that to you.
It's publicly available by region what the expectation of the cost will be?
The costs and benefits, I believe, are in the public document, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Price impacts as well.
If we could receive that, that would be useful through the clerk.
Committee.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go next to Monsieur Simard. Vous avez 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes, Mr. Simard. Thank you, John. Mr. Hargrove, in a document from the Natural Resources Department, the State of the Forests in Canada, it says that between 2010 and 2020, there were between 500 and 600 million trees that were planted on public land. So if we do the calculation, it's about 5.5 billion trees, probably most of them by industry. So we can see that it is possible to plant 2 billion trees, but the government hasn't met its part, got off on the wrong foot. Why is that? Well, we've had the commissioner's report, of course, but I don't have the impression that you have called on the expertise that people have when it comes to planting that many trees. I thought it was more of a political pitch, this idea of planting $2 billion. In 2020, Paul Lefebvre, my colleague, was there, and I asked, well, in Quebec, where forestry is so important, I went to those who are very involved in this, and I think that the experts in my region received a call from you just 4 or 5 weeks ago, even though this all started in 2020. So they hadn't heard from you before. Why?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for that question.
First of all, I'd say that we have consulted a range of experts. We also have deep expertise within the department. We're a science-based organization. For all of the projects, we have an expert panel that includes internal and external experts. We look for a range of expertise so that that expertise can be brought to bear on the projects. To the earlier part of your question around the number of trees that are planted in Canada, it's true that 2 billion trees over a decade is about a 40% increase. That means a significant ramp up in the supply chain.
But you said, I'm sorry, I don't have very much time, so would you agree to provide the committee, the list of experts that you consulted about the 2 billion tree program? Would you agree to provide the list of those approached to plant these trees? Because the expertise that I'm talking about comes from a university specialized program, and I find it strange that you don't have these agreements in place with the provinces to plant these 2 billion trees, and that's already a big problem if we want to achieve this target. I've never seen a plan that talks about what types of trees would be planted. Are we talking about reforestation, forestation? I've never seen a plan from the department, so it seems like you're improvising, making it up as you go. I would like to know when the strategy was developed for this tree planting operation. Was it starting back in 2019? And if so, the first trees were planted later. What was the logic? What was the process? Could you provide us with a document that lays that out?
Certainly. I'd be very happy to provide a document that lays out the planning and also a list of experts that we've consulted through the expert panels and also through our advisory committee.
Rapidement, à votre connaissance.
Very quickly, to your knowledge, did you consult experts in every province? Okay, very good. Thank you. In his report, the commissioner says that there should be, if we want to meet the 2 billion tree target, there have to be significant changes. Otherwise, you won't meet that target. And can you tell me whether significant changes have already taken place since that report?
Certainly. So the commissioner, I think, in the commissioner's report, and to be fair, the report looked at a slice in time early on in a program that is a 10-year program, and what the commissioner, a lot of what the commissioner was talking about was in terms of sort of ramping up efforts, and so as the commissioner mentioned, since the time of and scope of his report, we now have 7 agreements in principle with provinces and territories. We have 6 contribution agreements with them. We're now up to over 260 million trees committed in agreements or under negotiation. So there have been a lot of efforts, and I think we've really focused on making sure that we are working with the right people, that we are taking the right steps to set the program up for long-term success.
J'ai juste terminé là-dessus. Est-ce que
Just want to end on this.
So thank you, and we're going to go to Mr. Angus for his final 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my frustration is that the planet's on fire, and yet the Environment Commissioner gives us a report that says, he says, the list of failures grow longer and longer yet again. We can't continue to go from failure to failure. We need action and results, not just more targets and plans. So, Mr. Moffat, I want to ask you, it's a long list of devastating failures on the part of the government to address the climate catastrophe that's unfolding. How do you explain that of the 399 progress reports that Environment and Climate Change Canada was required to produce, it only completed one? Is that just that this is not that important, or do you not have the resources to get this work done?
I apologize. I'm not sure what 399 reports you're referring to.
He said of the 399 progress reports that Environment and Climate Change Canada was required to produce, it only completed one. So you're not aware of that?
Oh, I think he was referring to reports that he expected with respect to the methane equivalency agreements, which would not be with respect to 399. It would be, I think he was expecting us to produce one per year, and we've produced one so far over the 3 years that the agreements have been in place.
Okay, that's not how I read it. Anyways, we'll carry on. He says that regulations are an important way of achieving Canada's emission reduction targets. However, without comprehensive impact information, the government simply doesn't know whether it's using the right tools or not. So how are we to tell the Canadian public, don't worry, in the midst of this climate catastrophe that's unfolding, the government is on track to meet its reduction targets for 2030? Is that just performative? Is that just going to be like a good Instagram quote? Or do you actually have the tools to tell the government whether or not you're going to get there?
I think there's a couple of answers to that. First, we do attempt to project the impact of each regulation that we develop. We also report on the overall emissions from the economy, which are a result of a variety of inputs. We are, for the first time, the country has for the first time reduced its total emissions. I think the best place to look for Canadians is at the emission reduction plan that was produced last year, and then to hold the government accountable for implementing all of the measures in that plan, and for reporting on an annual basis about whether our emissions are going up or down. Our emissions are finally starting to trend in the right direction. And
well, certainly COVID helped. We're not sure if your emissions plan helped, but what he's saying is that you don't actually know if you're using the right tools. So this is a hope and a prayer, which is not going to help our planet as it burns. But I do want to ask, being that Canada is the only G7 country where emissions have risen and have been much more off track with the rest of the G7, we know that the government meets regularly with big oil, and we're seeing reports that Suncor helped write the first draft of the government carbon emissions plan. Isn't that like letting Dracula in charge of the blood bank?
I'm not aware of oil and gas sector officials writing our plan. Certainly none have contributed to
how many lobbying meetings would there be?
Drafting a single word of any regulation, which I'm responsible. I meet.
Would you say that there have been meetings with Suncor and other officials in terms of the emissions plan? Because it has failed, and this is the reporting that we've had, is that they've been meeting. We do know that the clean fuel standards are delayed by 3 years. So either, as the Environment Commissioner says, the alarm bells are ringing, or it's business as usual in the department. So have there been meetings with representatives from the oil lobby on these issues? And how many?
I can follow up with the number of meetings. I can tell you that I am among the most frequently met with official in the government of Canada. My door is open. I meet regularly with oil and gas industry. I meet regularly with environmental NGOs. I meet regularly with environmental justice representatives. I meet regularly with levels of all
they've
government.
had over 6,000 meetings with the government. That's more than ordinary people. That is serious inside information. So can you tell us what is the influence that oil and gas have when the government delays its clean fuel regs and when the government continues to not have an emissions cap where it's promised? I mean, somebody's
Point of order,
influencing
Mr.
Sorry,
this.
I'm going to stop the clock here. There's about 10 seconds left. I'm getting called for a point of order here.
So, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the line of questioning. I just asked some relatively tough questions of our officials as well, but I don't know the way that Mr. Angus is framing these questions. He can ask them in the House of Commons to the elected officials, not to our public servants, in the way that he's framing them. I think it's a disingenuous line of questioning. Thank you.
Well, actually, he's the one meeting, so this is the Liberals trying to interfere with my line of questioning. I want to get an answer. He meets with them. He told us he meets with them. How often does he meet with them? And
Mr. Angus, you have 10 seconds left. I'll let you, if there is a final question you wanted to put there, but then I would like to go to the officials to allow them the opportunity
we know
to
that they've
respond.
had over 6,000 meetings with Big Oil. We know the Liberals have just tried to stop me asking that question. We know that Mr. Moffat is one of the key people being in meeting with Big Oil. We want to know, and the public has a right to know, how that is influencing the emissions.
Yeah, your time's up,
reductions.
Charlie. So we'll go. I'll give the officials an opportunity to respond if they would like.
Well, I can. I can confidently respond that no sector, including the oil and gas sector, was responsible for the time that it took us to develop the clean fuel regulations. We responded to the Commissioner about the reason that these regulations took longer than the average regulation, and there were a number of factors there, primarily A, first life cycle regulation ever developed in Canada, and then B, a number of other measures were introduced by the government that required us to take those measures into account so that we could put in place a regulation that would be durable and based on which we've seen billions of dollars of investment in clean fuel as a result of the final text of the regulations.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, this we do have resources until about 5:50, given the late start, but I do have a budget for today that I need to get passed. I have also been asked by Mr. Morris if we would give him through unanimous consent 2.5 minutes. Okay, so then that's not accepted. So then I'll thank the witnesses for being here. And before we adjourn, there was a budget that was circulated for today's meeting. I'd simply like to get this passed. So everybody in favor of the budget as presented? All in favor? Okay. And folks, I had put an in-camera session, but that can be carried forward to Friday. So the intention is that we'll deal with that at the end of the meeting after we go through the reports that we're going to be looking at on federal subsidies. So with that, thank you to our witnesses for being here, and colleagues, we're adjourned until Friday.